most people would think about Mark Selby. If you look at the first few televised matches he played from just after he became a professional snooker player, you can clearly see the distance between his bridge hand and the cue ball is actually quite long. But skip forward in time until his first world title win and it's now clear his cue action is a lot more compact. This wouldn't have been the only reason his form improved, but it was definitely something he changed.
But why would closing this distance down help a professional snooker player in the first place?
Well, a lot of it will have to do with the speed of the table. Notice how much harder I have to strike the cue ball here in this side-by-side comparison with Mark Williams. Even though my table is fairly fast, it's still nowhere near as quick as what you'd see on TV. And if you're playing on the same sort of lightning fast table all the time, then you're simply not going to need so much cue power. So that's why a longer bridge is unnecessary, but why would a shorter one help?
The difference this makes is if my bridge hand's a long way from the cue ball and I accidentally move my cue very slightly one way or the other, that's going to make a big difference at the tip end. However, if I put my bridge hand closer to the cue ball and move it by the same amount, it doesn't make so much of a difference.
Basically, the cue pivots on the bridge hand, and because the bridge hand is closer to the cue ball, it means you don't have to be quite so accurate, which can mean you pop balls more consistently and have greater control over positional shots, which helps a lot with close control break building. But why does this help you cue so much better?
If you try cueing along the bulk line, even players with good cueing will notice the first halfway they bring their cue back and forward will probably go pretty much exactly straight. But the more you bring your cue back, the more offline it starts to go.
The further you pull your cue back, the more parts of your arm have to move, which just makes it harder to keep your cue straight.
So we got there pretty quick this week. It's a great idea and everybody should shorten up the bit. Oh.
Obviously, there's a lot more to it than this. And if you're too close to the cue ball, then you're going to struggle playing powerful shots accurately. And we're going to find out exactly how to get that right after we find Rabin from Solakhumbu in Nepal.
Really, what this is about is trying to accelerate the cue too quickly.
For this shot, I've pulled my cue back all the way and I'm striking it as hard as I can. And like this, my cue moves fairly straight. But if I try to hit the ball just as hard from a 75% distance, it makes my cue wobble a bit, and from about a 50% distance, it even makes me miss the ball. This is causing my body to move after I pull the cue back, me to throw my body weight at it and flick the cue in the air.
And that means the more time your cue has to accelerate up to speed, the smoother you're going to strike the cue ball.
The greater distance here allows me to keep still after I pull my cue back, and generates less of a wobble as I push the cue through, allowing me to get the power and spin I need on this shot.
So what you're looking for is a short distance between your bridge hand and your cue ball, and that'll give you more accuracy, but it's got to be long enough that when you play a harder shot, when you pull the cue back, you don't move at all or put the cue in the air to try and generate the power. Now you're probably thinking, why not just change the distance depending on the amount of power you intend to inject? Well, that might not be the solution. The problem is, during a game you've got enough to concentrate on already, and the last thing you want to be doing is working out whether you're using a long bridge, a short bridge, or even a medium bridge. And the other thing you've got to remember as well is if you're stretching for a shot, you won't be able to use the bridge you want essentially.
This means it's best to keep to the same distance between your bridge hand and the cue ball on 90% of the shots you play. But how do you do this? I'd recommend trying to play some shots at full power, starting with your bridge hand a long way from the cue ball and getting closer until you can't possibly play a shot without moving your body. Basically, you want to be as close and as accurate as possible while still being able to play all the shots.
So that seems to be about the minimum I can get away with, which is about 11 inches.
You don't necessarily need to measure this, and it's probably far better to work out where your thumb needs to go relative to the grain of your cue. Just want to be aware, as I was explaining before I lost the audio on this clip, that moving your bridge arm around will affect your cue arm, and you want to make sure you can keep this at the same angle as normal, which for most players will be pointing straight down when you're making contact with the cue ball. So have I found the right distance?
But it's not quite that simple because you rarely play a shot at absolutely full power. So for most shots I've been dropping it back to about 10.
From this distance I should be able to play well over 90% of my shots, and if I have to play the odd one or two at a greater distance from my bridge hand, then it shouldn't be too confusing. You just have to remember if you see your cue flicking up off the shot, you're probably too close.
Now just because you've got all that distance, it doesn't mean you have to use it, because delivering the cue too slowly can also cause problems.
Moving your cue over a great distance like this can cause it to stop and stutter as you try to push it through, which can both cause you to wobble and struggle with the pace of the shot.
Just remember, with slower shots you don't need to pull the cue back all the way to your bridge hand, and sometimes it's a good idea only to bring it halfway back, or sometimes even less, to just allow for a shot that only requires the amount of power you're giving it. You can seriously improve your game by pulling the cue back to the correct amount. The problem is, you tell somebody that and they take one of the two things to the extreme. So they try to be too accurate by hardly pulling the cue back at all and then jerking at it as they push through. Or they try and pull the cue back too far to get a smooth shot at the cue ball and don't deliver the cue smoothly again, jerking through the cue ball. Slightly too much is better than slightly too little. Like on a shot like this, I'm trying to play the cue ball off the top cushion for this red. Now when I do that, I only need to pull the cue back about this far. But the trouble is that's marginal. So when I pull it back that far, my arm might come round like this, or I might throw my body at it just to make sure I've got enough pace to get on the red. And you don't want to do that because that could mean I miss the black. So what I'm going to do instead is just pull the cue back, instead of just about that far, I'm going to pull it back that far to just make sure I've got enough power. So I'm pulling it back that far and pushing it through, and I'm easily on the red. Every now and again you're going to come across a shot where you have to strike the cue ball incredibly soft or incredibly hard, but for the majority of shots you want to be pulling your cue back an amount that makes it feel like you're going to strike it about 50 to 75% power.
This means for most of your shots your cue will be accelerating at the same speed, and you should automatically adjust the amount you pull the cue back to allow for the different pace of each and every shot.
The final thing to mention is it's not always going to be perfect like this shot. We might not be able to get our hand in the right position. For example, I might be too close to the cushion and have to squeeze my hand in between the cushion and the ball. Or the cue ball might be on the cushion itself, or it might be just a long way away from the cushion, but I can't get my hand in between, so I'd have a longer bridge than I'd want to.
As I've already said, this is also true if you have to stretch for shots or if you have to bridge over or around balls. And after we find Warcat from Monaghan Island, we can look at what we need to do to get all of this right.
So in conclusion, the first thing you want to do is make sure whatever you're doing isn't too complicated that you have to think about it in a game. You should be able to do it subconsciously. The second thing is to find the distance your bridge hand needs to be away from the cue ball to allow you to play a shot full power without it restricting you at all.
Thirdly, if you're adjusting your bridge hand at all, make sure it doesn't affect the rest of your technique, how you lean into the table, and especially the angle of your cueing arm. Fourth is to only pull your cue back as much as you need to, but err on the side of pulling the cue back too far. This can increase your accuracy and consistency because there's just less that can go wrong. You just want to make sure that you're not moving during or after your backswing or flicking your cue up in the air after the shot.
And finally, just remember to pull your cue back far enough. It shouldn't feel like an effort to strike the cue ball. And really, you're looking to play the shot at what should feel like about 50 to 75% power for the majority of shots.